I grew up hearing that a woman's wedding day was supposed to be the happiest day of her life, and for a while, I truly believed that with all my heart. When I looked into his eyes at the altar, I thought I was staring at my happy ending, or better yet, our beginning. We lived through intense months, full of plans, laughter, and late-night dinners in the kitchen. He was kind, attentive, the kind of man any woman dreams of calling her husband. But over time, some things started to change. At first, it was just little things, silly details, gestures I ignored, silences I chose to fill with excuses. Until, 6 months after our wedding, he sat beside me, held my hand firmly, and said, "Before you find out on your own, I need to tell you something." That was the moment the ground began to disappear beneath my feet. If you've ever trusted someone blindly, this story is for you. Stay with me until the end. 6 months had passed since we said "I do," and I thought I had learned everything there was to know about the man I married. But that morning, something was different. I remember the light pouring into our bedroom through the half-closed curtains, the way it hit his face as he sat at the edge of the bed. He wasn't looking at me. His shoulders were tense, his hands clenched, and for the first time since we became husband and wife, I felt distance. Not physical, but something deeper. The kind of distance that makes the air heavy and the silence deafening. I asked if he was okay, and he said, "We need to talk." Just those 4 words. No emotion, no eye contact. My stomach tightened. I'd heard those words before from friends, from movies, and I always knew they came before something irreversible. He finally turned to me, eyes dark, not from anger but from the weight of whatever was about to come. He took a deep breath and said, "I need to tell you something before you find out on your own." In that moment, time froze. I could hear my heartbeat echoing in my ears. My mind went blank and loud all at once. I didn't know if I wanted to hear what was coming. A million thoughts raced. Had he been unfaithful? Was he sick? Had he done something unforgivable? I searched his face for clues, but all I saw was fear. A quiet, defeated fear. He told me to listen until the end before saying anything. That was when I knew it was serious. The kind of serious that doesn't come with simple apologies. He started talking, slowly, carefully, like someone walking barefoot through broken glass. He said there were things about his past he never had the courage to tell me, things he buried so deep he hoped they'd never surface. But now, they were beginning to catch up with him and with us. He admitted that during the early months of our relationship, before we got engaged, he was involved with someone else. Not just a fling, someone he had feelings for. He ended it before proposing, convinced he was choosing the right path with me. But he never told her the truth, and recently, she reached out again. Not just with messages, but with something else, something that changed everything. A child. She claimed the child was his. My breath caught in my throat. My hands went cold. He said he didn't want to hide it from me, but he didn't know how to bring it up. He didn't even know if it was true. But the possibility was enough to shake him to his core. He showed me the messages, the photos, the paternity test requests she sent him. And as I stared at the screen, I felt like the floor had been ripped out from under me. My world, the one I thought we had built together, cracked open like thin ice beneath my feet. I didn't know what to say. I wanted to scream. I wanted to cry. But more than anything, I wanted to rewind time. Go back to a version of us that wasn't tainted by secrets. He kept talking, explaining, defending, apologizing, but his words barely reached me. I was lost in my own thoughts, replaying every moment we shared, wondering which ones were real and which ones had been built on silence. I asked him why he never told me before we got married. He said he was scared. Scared to lose me, scared to face what he left unresolved, scared that everything we had would fall apart before it even began. I couldn't speak. I just stared at him, this man I loved, this man who now felt like a stranger. I could see he was hurting too, but that didn't ease the pain blooming in my chest. I got up, walked to the bathroom, locked the door behind me, and slid down the cold tiles until I reached the floor. I sat there, knees pulled to my chest, breathing heavily, trying to process what I had just heard. A child, another woman, a part of him that existed before us but now stood right in the middle of everything we were trying to build. I thought of the nights we talked about having kids, about what names we'd choose, how we'd decorate a nursery. And now, someone else had already shared that part of him. Maybe not by choice, but it didn't matter. It still hurt. I stayed in that bathroom for what felt like hours, not ready to face him again. I didn't know if I hated him or just hated the situation. I felt betrayed, but I also felt something else, something I didn't expect. A small part of me still loved him, and that made everything harder. When I finally opened the door, he was still sitting there, head in his hands. He looked up at me with eyes full of guilt and helplessness. He asked me to say something, anything, but I couldn't, because the truth is, I didn't know what I felt. Not yet. All I knew was that nothing would ever be the same. Not between us, not within me. For days after his confession, I walked through the house as if I were moving inside a strange dream, a kind of emotional fog where everything looked the same, but nothing was the same anymore. And the scariest part was that he was still there, in our home, with the same hands that once touched me so tenderly, now hesitant, unsure if they still had the right to come close. And me? I didn't know either if I wanted distance or comfort, because my body missed him, but my soul shrank every time he came near. And so we started living between brief glances and heavy silences, trying to fake normalcy for visitors, for the neighbors, for the world, while inside us everything slowly crumbled. I kept trying to understand how someone could hide something so serious from the person they claimed to love, and even as I tried to find excuses, nothing felt enough, because it wasn't just about the other woman or the possibility of a child. It was about having let me build castles on shifting sand, about promising me a future without clearing the ghosts of the past, and that hurt like being ripped from a dream with brutality. And the worst part was that he was trying, truly, he was trying to win me back, making my coffee, leaving little notes, looking at me with eyes begging for forgiveness. But I couldn't trust the shine in his eyes anymore, because now I knew even the sweetest gaze could hide secrets. And I found myself thinking how strange love is, how it can persist even when wounded, even when full of doubt, even soaked in sadness. And I felt that every day, this wounded love, breathing with difficulty, as if waiting for me to decide if it should live or die. So I started writing, not for him, but for me. In an old notebook, I poured out all the questions I couldn't ask aloud, all the answers I was afraid to hear, and through that silent writing, I realized what hurt me the most wasn't the secret itself, but his choice to protect me with lies, as if I were too fragile to handle the truth, as if the love we had wasn't strong enough to face the past together. And that feeling of being spared out of pity made me feel small, diminished inside my own marriage. And even though he said he loved me, I kept wondering, what kind of love chooses silence when it should choose trust? And while he kept trying to prove he was still the same man I fell for, I was discovering that I was no longer the same woman, because pain changes us in ways you can't always see in the mirror, but you feel it in your chest, and in every hug you refuse, in every word you swallow. And I began to look at him like someone looks at a stranger with a familiar face, someone who once was part of me, but now felt like he belonged to another time, another story. And each night beside him became a silent battle between the desire to reconnect and the fear of losing myself even more. And sometimes I pretended to sleep just to avoid conversation, just to not hear more explanations, more apologies that, however sincere, couldn't untie the knot he had tied inside me. And amid all this, there was also the cruel doubt about the child. He hadn't taken the test yet, was trying to get everything organized, said he didn't want to hide anything from me anymore, that he would involve me in every step. But I felt excluded from a story that might change our entire life, and I wondered what I would do if it turned out to be true, if he really had a child with another woman, before me, but still present now, in our home. And I thought about what it would be like to see that boy or girl, born from a former love or a mistake, and whether I'd have the maturity to handle it, to love a child who would remind me every day of the pain I felt. And in those moments, I felt cruel just for thinking that, but it was real, it was human. And I allowed myself to feel all that without guilt, because pretending everything was okay was already hard enough. And I knew that if I wanted to save what was left, I'd have to do it with truth, not with masks. So I started writing letters to him, letters I never gave, where I said everything my pride kept me from speaking, where I cried without hiding the tears, where I said I still loved him but didn't know if that was enough, because love doesn't hold everything together when trust is in ruins. And in one of those letters, I wrote, I don't know if I want to stay or leave, I just know I'm in pieces, and none of your gestures can fix what broke inside me. And when I finished that sentence, I realized I was finally facing what I had always avoided that sometimes the biggest challenge isn't forgiving. It's deciding whether it's worth trying again with someone who shattered your world while saying they loved you. And with that thought, I lay down that night, not knowing what tomorrow would bring, but knowing that, somehow, I would never again be who I was before that morning when he said, "I need to tell you something before you find out on your own." That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the sound of his breathing beside me, and I wondered how two people who once clung to each other so tightly could now feel so far apart. It was almost unbearable, that silence between us. It wasn't angry or violent, it was hollow, like something sacred had left the room and we were too afraid to name it. I turned my back to him, not because I hated him, but because I didn't know how to face the version of him that kept a secret so heavy from me. I thought about the woman, the messages, the possibility of the child, and what haunted me the most wasn't just the truth, it was all the days I had laughed with him, touched him, made love to him, completely unaware of the storm brewing beneath our life. I felt foolish, not because I was naive, but because I had believed so deeply in us. I had painted our future with such vibrant colors, and now it all looked so pale. Over the next few days, I began to withdraw in ways even I didn't recognize. I would cook and leave his plate on the table without a word. I would walk past him without touching his shoulder. I would smile for friends and dissolve the moment they turned away. And he noticed. Of course he noticed. One night, he came to me and said, "Please don't give up on us." And that sentence hit me harder than anything else, because I hadn't even realized how much I already was giving up. Piece by piece, emotion by emotion. He told me he had scheduled the DNA test. He said he would accept whatever result came back, and that he would never lie to me again, no matter the outcome. But it was hard to trust that promise when the damage had already been done. I nodded, said nothing, and walked away. In the quiet of the bathroom, I stared at myself in the mirror, searching for the woman who had once been so sure of love. I looked older, not in years, but in spirit. There was a tiredness in my eyes I couldn't blink away. I kept asking myself what I needed to move forward. Was it honesty, time, distance, or just the courage to admit I didn't know if I could ever see him the same way again? A few mornings later, I found an envelope on the kitchen table. My name in his handwriting. Inside, a letter not dramatic, not desperate, just real. He wrote about his fear, his shame, his guilt. He said that he had watched me retreat into silence and hated himself for it. He said he didn't expect forgiveness, only hoped for a chance to rebuild anything with me, even if it wasn't what we once had. And as I read his words, tears blurred the ink. I hated how much I still cared, how much I still wanted to believe that people can make mistakes and come back from them. But I also couldn't deny the fear that now lived inside me. The fear that if I gave him all of me again, and he broke me a second time, there would be nothing left to gather. So I wrote him back. For the first time since that morning, I let my guard down. I told him that I didn't know where we would end up, but that I couldn't continue pretending everything was fine. I told him I needed space, not to punish him, but to find myself again. Because somewhere between the vows and the betrayal, I had lost the version of me who believed she was safe. And before I could choose to stay, I had to reconnect with her. He read my letter quietly and said, "I'll wait, however long you need." And I believed him. Or maybe I just wanted to. We started sleeping in separate rooms, not as a punishment, but as a way to breathe. I began going for long walks by myself, headphones in, world out. I started therapy. I wrote every day. Some days, I cried until I fell asleep. Other days, I felt strong enough to imagine a future either with him or without him. I wasn't sure what healing would look like, but I knew it couldn't be rushed. Then came the day the DNA results arrived. He didn't open the envelope alone. He waited for me, and when he handed it to me, I realized how much courage that took. My hands trembled as I unfolded the paper. I scanned the lines, searching for the one sentence that could change everything. And there it was, probability of paternity, 99.9%. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just stood there, staring at that number, while a quiet wind of finality swept through my chest. I handed it back to him and whispered, "Okay." He asked what I wanted to do next, but I didn't have an answer. Not yet. That night, I walked into the guest room, lay down, and stared out the window at a sky full of stars I used to wish upon. I thought about the child, an innocent life that had no fault in this. I didn't feel hate. I didn't feel rage. I just felt tired. Tired of hurting. Tired of pretending. Tired of feeling like love had to come with so much ache. And somewhere in the middle of that exhaustion, a quiet truth settled in. Maybe this wasn't about saving the marriage. Maybe it was about saving myself first. If you're still here, listening to all of this, thank you. I didn't expect anyone to care about my story. But if you do, if you've ever been broken by love, if you've ever had to rebuild yourself from the pieces someone else left behind, then maybe you understand. I don't have answers yet. I'm still walking through it. But if anything I said touched something inside you, I ask gently, truly from one heart to another, subscribe to this channel. Not for me, but for us. And if you feel like it, leave a comment or share this with someone who might need to hear it too. Sometimes, healing begins when we stop hiding what hurts. The days after the test results felt strange, not just because the truth was now official, but because everything around me looked exactly the same. The furniture hadn't moved. The sun still poured into the kitchen every morning like it always had. The neighbors still waved with their usual warmth. But something deep inside me had shifted so profoundly that I no longer felt like the same woman. I moved slowly, deliberately, as if carrying something invisible and heavy with me at all times. And I was carrying the weight of knowing that our marriage was no longer just ours. That somewhere out there was a child with his eyes, perhaps his laugh, and a mother who had once been part of his story and who now would always be. I tried to imagine her, this other woman, not with hate, but with curiosity. Was she kind? Was she manipulative? Was she devastated when he left her for me? Or had she accepted it, knowing he had already chosen someone else? It was maddening not to know, but I also didn't want to ask. There were parts of that story I wasn't sure I could handle. I wasn't jealous of her exactly. I wasn't angry in the way people expect when betrayal enters the room. My hurt was quieter than that. It didn't scream. It sat in the corners of my chest, whispering questions when I least expected. Questions like, was I a mistake he tried to correct? Did he propose to me out of love or guilt? If the child hadn't come back into the picture, would he ever have told me the truth? And the worst of all, would I have wanted to know if none of this had ever surfaced? I found myself asking things I never imagined I'd ask, like whether love could exist at the same time as betrayal, whether healing always required forgetting, and whether staying made me strong or just afraid of starting over. I began avoiding mirrors, not because I hated what I saw, but because I couldn't recognize her. The woman staring back at me looked like me, but there was something missing in her eyes. Something bright that used to be there without effort. I wasn't sure if it would come back. I think I was mourning, not just the lie, but the version of my marriage I had believed in. I used to replay our wedding day in my mind like a favorite movie, but now those memories felt distant, like someone else's story that I had accidentally stepped into. I stopped watching wedding videos online. I avoided anything that looked too perfect. It all felt dishonest now, or maybe just too far from where I was standing. I couldn't bring myself to hate him. That would have been easier. If he had been cruel or indifferent, I could have built walls and walked away. But he was there every morning, quiet, present, remorseful. And somehow, that made it worse. Because I saw his pain too. I saw him shrinking under the weight of what he had done, and I wondered how much of him was breaking alongside me. But compassion didn't make the pain go away. It just complicated it. We lived like that, in a fragile truce, where every conversation was careful, every gesture weighed down by the question of what would happen next. I didn't ask about the other woman. I didn't ask about the child. I wasn't ready. I knew one day I would have to face it all, but not yet. For now, I needed to breathe. I started going to a small park not far from home. There was a bench beneath an old tree, and I'd sit there with a journal, pretending to write but mostly just staring. People passed by with their dogs, their strollers, their laughter, and I felt both invisible and exposed at once. I wondered how many of them were carrying their own quiet heartbreaks, hiding cracks behind everyday smiles. I found comfort in that thought that I wasn't alone in my ache, even if no one around me knew it. I began to reclaim small things. Coffee in the morning just for me, a walk without looking at my phone, music I hadn't listened to in years. These moments didn't erase the pain, but they reminded me of who I was before all this. before the lies and the doubt and the slow unraveling. I didn't make any decisions. Not yet. I didn't pack a suitcase. I didn't draw a line in the sand. What I did was softer, quieter. I just started putting myself first again, not because I had stopped loving him, but because I had forgotten how to love me in the middle of all this. There were nights I still reached for him in my sleep, and mornings I woke up with guilt for not leaving. But I learned that healing isn't linear. It's messy, inconsistent, and full of contradictions. Some days, I felt strong. Others, I felt like I was drowning in questions I couldn't answer, and that was okay. I let go of the pressure to know. What came next? I started letting each day speak for itself. Sometimes all I could do was get through the hours. Other times, I caught glimpses of peace, like sunlight slipping through the cracks of a closed curtain. I didn't know if I'd ever trust him fully again. I didn't even know if I wanted to. But I did know this. Something inside me had survived. Even in the thickest fog of heart, there came a moment quiet, unremarkable on the surface, when I realized I could no longer keep living in the space between staying and leaving. It happened one afternoon as I was folding laundry, a task so ordinary it should have distracted me, but my hands froze over one of his shirts. I held it for a moment, felt the texture, remembered how it used to smell like his cologne, and suddenly, I was overwhelmed by the weight of everything and said. I sat down on the edge of the bed, shirt still in my hands, and whispered to myself, "What are you holding on to?" And I didn't know. Not exactly. Was it the love we shared before everything? Was it the promise of who I thought he was? Or was it the fear of what life would look like if I let go? That question stayed with me for days. I didn't try to answer it right away. I let it circle around in my mind, pressing against all the soft parts of me that still believed in us. I started imagining what my life might look like without him, not as punishment, not as revenge, but as an honest exploration. I pictured mornings waking up alone but at peace. I imagined building something new, maybe slowly, maybe clumsily, but without the shadows that now filled our home. It scared me, I won't lie. The idea of walking away from the life we built together felt like tearing pages out of a book I wasn't ready to stop reading. But what I feared more was staying in a story that no longer belonged to the person I was becoming. We kept sharing the same space, still speaking, still navigating routines like partners. But there was a softness missing from our connection. It wasn't anger, it was resignation, as if we were both waiting for the other to name the ending neither of us wanted to write. Then one night, as we sat at the dinner table in silence, he looked up at me and asked, "Do you still love me?" I didn't answer right away, not because I didn't know, but because I did. I said, "I think I do, but I don't know if that love is enough anymore." He nodded slowly, as if he had known all along but needed to hear it from me. "I'm not asking you to forget," he said. "I just want a chance to be better." And I believed he meant it. I really did. But I also knew that love without trust is like trying to drink from a broken glass. It might hold something beautiful, but it cuts you every time you reach for it. I needed clarity, so I started writing lists not of pros and cons, but of truths. What I needed, what I feared, what I hoped for. And in doing so, I realized that the woman I was becoming needed space, autonomy, and the freedom to choose love again, not cling to it out of memory. I began preparing emotionally, not for a dramatic goodbye, but for a conscious shift. I told him I wanted to spend a week away, just me, somewhere quiet, without noise, without history staring me in the face. At first, he was hurt. He thought it meant I had already chosen to leave. But I explained that if I didn't step away, I'd never know if staying was real or just habit. So I packed a bag and left, not with rage, not with sorrow, with clarity. I rented a small place by the coast, nothing fancy, just silence and ocean and space to breathe. The first night there, I cried harder than I had in months. Not for him, not even for us, but for myself, for the version of me that had tried so hard to make things work, who had poured so much love into something that eventually cracked. I cried for her hope, her fear, her ache, and then I rested. For the first time in what felt like forever, I rested without expectation. I walked along the shoreline every morning. I wrote pages and pages in my journal. I ate alone slowly, letting the quiet fill me rather than haunt me. I started to remember who I was before pain reshaped me. A week turned into 10 days. On the 11th, I got a message from him. "No matter what you decide, I'll always love you, but I hope you come home." I stared at that message for a long time. It didn't make me cry. It didn't make me rush back. But it made me smile, just a little, because for the first time, I felt that he understood. That love sometimes means letting go. I didn't answer right away. I gave myself permission to decide slowly. I needed to make a choice that honored not just the love we had, but the woman I had become through it all. And deep down, I knew I was almost ready, not just to choose, but to accept that no matter what path I walked, I would be okay. I would carry the beauty and the sorrow of this chapter with me, but I would not let it define me. I was not broken. I was awakening. And in that stillness, I finally felt something I hadn't in months. Peace. The day I returned home was gray, not rainy, not stormy, just still. The kind of sky that sits quiet, watching, as if holding its breath. I stepped through the front door, unsure of what would meet me on the other side. I didn't know if I was returning as a wife, a stranger, or something in between. The house smelled like us. That scent I had grown so familiar with, the coffee in the morning, the old wooden cabinets, the faint warmth of him in the hallway. He wasn't waiting at the door. I think he knew I needed space to come back on my own terms. I placed my bag down gently, took off my shoes, and sat on the edge of the couch where we had spent so many evenings in silence these past few months. But this time, the silence felt different. Not heavy, not haunted, just quiet. He came out of the kitchen a few minutes later. He didn't rush. He didn't speak. He just stood there for a moment, looking at me with those tired, honest eyes, and then asked softly, "Are you okay?" And for the first time in a long time, I said, "Yes, I think I am." He nodded, and that simple exchange carried more truth than any long conversation we could have had. We sat down, side by side, not touching, not deciding, just being. And that was enough for that day. In the following weeks, we didn't label what we were. There were no declarations, no plans to resume where we had left off. We shared meals. We cleaned the house. Sometimes we laughed at small things. Other times, I would find myself staring at him, wondering if the wound inside me had truly begun to heal, or if I had just learned how to walk without limping. We talked, slowly, carefully, like two people learning each other all over again. I told him about the sea, the air, the nights I cried alone, and the mornings I felt strong. He told me about his dreams, the books he started reading, the therapy sessions he was attending to understand the version of himself that let silence become a shield. He told me he hadn't seen the child yet, that he was waiting until we had peace between us, not because he wanted to avoid it, but because he knew he couldn't carry both weights at once. And I respected that. We agreed on nothing permanent. We took it one day at a time. I still kept my own room. I still wrote every night, but I let myself look at him again, really look, not with anger or expectation, but with curiosity. Could we grow something new from what had been shattered? Not a return to what we were, but something different, smaller maybe, but honest. I didn't know, but for the first time, I was okay with not knowing. Some days I still feel the echo of that old pain. When I see a child on the street and wonder if he has the same laugh. When I catch my reflection and remember the woman who stood in the bathroom shaking from truth. But those moments pass now. They don't consume me. They visit, and then they go. I've come to understand that love is not always a straight road. Sometimes it breaks you open, and the healing is not about going back, but about choosing what to carry forward. I chose to carry grace, for him, for myself, for the woman I was and the woman I am still becoming. Our story didn't end the way I imagined when I first walked down the aisle. But maybe stories don't have to follow the script we dreamed of to be real. Maybe it's enough to keep turning the page. If you've walked with me through all of this, I want to say thank you from the deepest part of me. These stories deserve to be remembered, not because they are perfect, but because they are true. If you haven't yet, I ask you to subscribe to this channel. It's one way to keep these memories alive, to let voices like mine find a place to breathe. And if any part of this story touched your heart, please leave a comment. Tell me what it stirred inside you, because sharing isn't just about telling, it's about witnessing. And no story survives without someone who listens. Lastly, if you want to continue walking through stories like mine, take a moment to explore the other voices in this space, especially the ones in the playlist. They're there for a reason. You'll find the link in the description or pinned in the comments below. Sometimes healing comes from hearing that someone else made it through, and sometimes telling it is how we survive.